Doctor Who Heaven Sent, and wow guys, did I agonize over how much to talk about this episode, how much to spoil in this episode. I really didn't know what to say because this episode was just so... I don't want to just throw around the term groundbreaking, but it was a very pivotal episode in the Doctor Who canon. And I did have some issues with that because I did feel like there were a couple of times when it took that for granted and just kind of threw aspects of the mythology together and didn't really care whether or not they made sense. But the overall theme of the episode really made up for it. And I'm going to do my best to review this episode without spoiling much at all. There will be one minor spoiler, but that's about it. Everything else, I'm just going to talk about the theme of the episode. Thematically speaking, this episode was about the defiance of the inevitable. The Doctor, after being teleported away at the end of the previous episode, which I talked about how I didn't like it very much, ends up in this sort of castle. It's like a clockwork castle that keeps changing its shape, and he's being pursued by what seems to be some kind of robotic creature. Now, the creature itself I did not find threatening at all. It was basically a cloaked thing that you couldn't see what was underneath. We've seen that before in Lord of the Rings. We've seen that before in Harry Potter. It's not new anymore. What felt more like the true antagonist of this episode was the overwhelming sense of dread. Everywhere that the Doctor went, it felt like he was being led in circles, and this thing always was able to find him, and he always knew when it was coming, because there's these screens up on the walls all throughout the castle that show the creature's point of view. And he finds little tidbits throughout this entire area that don't quite add up, until later, when you get this big reveal that shows just exactly what the Doctor has stepped into, what exactly he is experiencing, what exactly the true nature of this place is, and it's like soul crushing. You just don't know how the Doctor's going to get out of here. And yet, despite everything, he still does. And he does it on his own terms, too, which is what's really interesting. And I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying the Doctor gets out of here. As I've said before, the Doctor is not going to die. We know that because he's the main protagonist of the series. Can't have the series without him. And we know Capaldi is still signed on for more episodes, so he's not going to regenerate out of the character either. It's kind of like, I've actually been talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit on my channel lately. It's like in Yu-Gi-Oh! You always know the main character is going to win. It's more a question of how. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot of this episode, save for one other thing. One more thing that I do consider a genuine spoiler. So if you want to leave this review behind with just my recommendation, absolutely watch this episode. It is a pivotal episode in the series and is an absolute must-see. You have to watch it if you're a Doctor Who fan, period. With that having been said, I can now continue. Throughout this season, we have had a couple of running themes, a couple of repeated phrases, one of which is actually more in the form of an object. It's the round device, the confession dial that the Doctor sent to Missy in the first episode of the season, which was how she knew he was in trouble. And that does play into this episode. I will tell you that that does play into this episode. Finally, we get some resolution for that thing, and that's the part that I don't think really worked out as well as I think the writers intended it to, but you be the judge. The other thing is something I haven't mentioned yet, because I was waiting for its payoff before I mentioned it in any of the reviews, because it was only brought up every so often. I don't even think it was brought up in more than like one or two episodes. I'm having to remember off the top of my head. I probably should have researched this. It was mentioned of something called the Hybrid, and that being some kind of Gallifreyan legend of a supposed half Dalek that would be the Ultimate Warrior. In this episode, we do find out what the Hybrid is, and it is not a half Dalek. The Doctor knows that there can't be a half Dalek. But we do find out what it is, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't surprised, but it definitely has a huge impact on the series. And then there's the end of this. The end of this episode literally gave me chills. Because, of course, I try to stay as separated as possible from the fandom before I go and watch these episodes, so I hadn't seen any of the previews. I didn't know anything about what was going on. And then the ending, the Doctor finally accomplishes what he needs to accomplish to escape the castle and ends up somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where. The fact that he's actually there in this place, it changes the entire landscape of the show going forward. And I am so psyched to see where they're going with this storyline heading into what I believe is the winter finale, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, someone correct me. Because quite frankly, this episode, it changes everything. In a good way, I think. If they continue to write the way they did in this episode, continue to carry through some of the themes they introduced in this episode, I definitely think this could make for one of the best winter finales we've ever seen, and could lead into some storylines that would make some of the immediately following episodes some of the best of the series that we've ever seen. And that was actually a little more spoilery of a review than I wanted it to be. I apologize for that. But once again, I reiterate, if you have not seen this episode and you are a fan of Doctor Who, you have to see it. It's that important. And that's really all I can say on the subject. I'm going to zip my lips, not going to say another word, or else I could ruin something for somebody. But as always, guys, I ask you, have you seen this episode? If you have, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.